Could you speak to or define selective abstraction? Because this is something that might be worth digging into.
Sure. Selective abstraction is when we take one detail from a big picture and we construct the story of that whole big picture around the detail.
Mm-hmm.
An example, it's probably a common example, but even in my own life is like I can come to work and I can have a good day at work and feel like I'm doing good things and I'm helping people. I generally can feel good about things. But then if I can't find my keys when I'm leaving, and this is like it's really happened, and then I'm frustrated now and I'm frustrated with myself. And when I finally find my keys or I get people to help me find my keys, the narrative that's going on in my head is like, what a loser, right? I mean, you can't even find your car keys to drive home. What the hell is wrong with you? And like, that's the story. And then I can get home and like my wife could ask me, how was your day? And I'm like, it's a terrible day because I'm incompetent, right? Because like I built the story of the whole day around what? The salient negative,
right.
The thing that triggered in me, my own susceptibility to thinking I'm not good enough and what I'm doing isn't worthwhile enough. And look what's wrong with me. And that's selective abstraction because that was probably 10 minutes of my day. But my brain builds the whole story of the day, which is my story of myself, right, around that negative thing.
Mm. Yeah, it's selective attention is a hell of a thing, right? It's like you buy a new car, and all of a sudden everyone's driving the same car. But of course, those cars are already out there. You're just paying more attention now.
And that's so big because this is all about salience biases. What are we paying attention to, right? And trauma makes us pay attention to the negative. That's why we think the world is less safe of a place or that we're less competent people. Like this is the danger that we use selective abstraction and salience biases and attribution biases where something negative happens, then I'm going to attribute it to me. And I see this all the time where, something negative may happen next door, a person had nothing to do with, but they feel that it's their fault because we get enough of this in ourselves and we literally forget who we are or what we're worth, which is why people will stay in jobs that they hate when they could try something different, or they'll stay in abusive relationships when they could end the abusive relationship and not enter another one, right? It's this, where does all that end up? It ends up in learned helplessness, and learned helplessness pushes people towards more trauma and very often towards death.
Could you say more about that when you say towards death?
Because the accumulation of trauma makes people more and more desperate for ways of coping. It's like, you had talked about drug addiction, and we talked about the decrease in role performance and the shame that comes along with it and the stigma. I mean, nobody decides, I'm going to use drugs because what I want to do is ruin my life. Like no one makes that decision, right?
Yeah.
So if we look at, as you were saying, Dr. Mattei was saying, is like, look at the pain in the person. Like, where did that come from? And not always, but a lot of times where drug abuse and drug addiction comes from comes from pain and suffering and a desperation to feel different. So more pain and suffering means people are more likely to repeat maladaptive patterns that lead them to more trauma. And they're more likely to feel desperate for soothing in a way that can, for example, pave the way to substance use. Because imagine like a set of blinders that it starts off, they're outside of our peripheral vision. So they're not affecting us at all. But as time goes on, they can encroach more and more and more as the person has more trauma, less healthy coping mechanisms, a more negative view of self, a more negative view of the world. And then the blinders come in, and at some point, the blinders are so narrow that all the person sees, it can be is basically a helpless and hopeless picture, right? And that's where a lot of suicide comes from.
Yeah, absolutely.
And where a lot of accidental deaths come from. So often the goal is, when I think about what are we doing in trauma treatment, and the image that's in my head a lot is, I imagine a set of blinders, a person is just peeking through with one eye, and we're trying to pull them out so they see the breadth of truth, right? The breadth of their perspective allows that person to again see truth. And remember, like an example, I absolutely understood at one point in time that violence is not acceptable in my life, right? I understood that. And I don't believe that any less now than I did then. But boy, I kind of forgot it in the middle
Mm-hmm.
because the person forgot that they could have a life free of violence or that they deserve a life free of violence. That's where this narrowing of blinders and the change in emotion and how emotion impacts our memories and tells us what our memories mean, right? The memory of something happy with other people can go from being a memory that says, right, I can do anything and I can interact with people and they like me and want me to be around, to a memory of something that's impossibly lost for the person.
Yeah.
And again, that's not true, but if you see it as impossibly lost, it is, unless there's some process that leads you to a place where you remember what's true that you forgot.